So, welcome to the Node.js benchmarking workgroup meeting for August 28th, 2018. We may have a light meeting today because we don't have a number of our regular attendees, guessing that summer's getting in the way on that front. Hold on, I have to stop the broadcast. Okay, so we'll take a quick look at our regular schedule, and then we do have a couple of new people, Oliver and Rip, who are potentially going to help looking at some new benchmarking use cases. So once we take a quick look at the regular agenda, we will then probably transition over to that. So looking at the standard agenda, things tagged with Node.js benchmarking. So investigating the time taken and number of benchmarks in core. Gareth, who's working on that, isn't here today, so we'll skip an update on that. And the same actually goes for the next two, which are require cached perf being lower. Although on that front, I can give a bit of an update. I know Udem's been trying to get to recreate that, hasn't been able to recreate it on a local machine. And I've been trying to get him access to the actual benchmarking machine itself, added his SSH keys and so forth, but for some reason, I don't think he was being able to log in still. And so I still need to catch up with him to see if we can get him access there. And then the next one on his list is to move on to the Ghost benchmarking workload. So I don't think there's any progress on that either. So that's our standard agenda. So I guess next thing, Oliver and Rip, do you want to introduce yourselves and just give a little bit of the context on the areas you were interested in looking at?
Sure, I'll start. So my name is Rip Sohan. I work as part of the CTO group of SoloFlare Communications. For those of you who don't know, SoloFlare Communications, we build high-speed network adapters. So this is kind of 10, 25, 40, 100 gig Ethernet adapters. These are standard Ethernet adapters. The work that we want to do is basically we've got a software stack called OnLoad, which is basically a kernel bypass stack that is complementary with the actual TCP stack that exists in Linux kernel. We are able to show massive improvements for web style and request response type workloads, and have done so in the past for HFT style applications. We are now interested in applying the same sorts of techniques to Node.js, and as part of that effort, we thought we'd reach out to the Node.js group about the benchmarking that you guys are doing and see if there's any way we can contribute towards this. So we are interested in helping to do some of this work. What we're interested in getting out from you guys is guidance on, the correct sorts of paradigms for writing these programs and also the correct frameworks, and trying to build things that are representative of things that Node.js developers would do in real life. Oliver, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Oliver. I'm a summer intern at SoloFlare. I'm a second year university student at Cambridge. And I've been, first of all, getting Node.js to actually work on SoloFlare's network stack, which involved hacking, rewriting bits of it, but that can be done more nearly in future. And I've done plenty of simple Apache benchmarks of a very simple Node.js program. That's about it.
Okay, well, welcome. And, I think you found the right place to start moving some of that stuff forward. My first question, I heard Oliver say you had to modify Node.js to be able to run, your stack underneath it. Is that right?
Yeah, so the stack intercepts calls to various system calls, but libuv uses the syscall system call rather than the explicit system call. So it was just a case of replacing one with the other.
Okay. And is there any downside to that? Like, I guess I'm just thinking, is it something that potentially you want to try and contribute back to Node itself at some point?
We could do, but it would be a big... I'm not sure, because I'm not sure whether Node are particularly interested because it's only for our use case on Linux.
Right.
So, definitely from our perspective, to have this integrated into libuv would be ideal. I think we don't have a lot of context about why libuvs actually not calling out to the C library, it basically makes a syscall out of libuv. But I expect the reasons for that are probably to do with not having. It could probably be a case of that they aren't interested in, or they want to be sure about the code path all the way to the kernel. We are quite happy to start talking to the libuv guys about whether our patches are something they'll be willing to accept. If not, then we can move this functionality into onload. So there's two ways of solving the problem. One is we modify libuv. The other is we can do a patch to onload that we would run as part of the application profile that runs against Node.js. So either approach is fine with us.
Okay. I'm just always interested to know if there's things that the runtime is doing that prevent add-on or plugging in new functionality or adding something new in. And, in those cases, understanding if like an API makes sense to sort of enable that, or as you mentioned in your case, is it worth investigating whether there was a conscious choice made or somebody just chose one versus the other?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing we could do is we could open a bunch of issues on GitHub to try and find out a little bit more about the issues that we're facing and the context for them to try and work out whether a patch would be useful or whether we should just go and solve it in our stack.
Yeah, I think like at least an issue saying, hey, we noticed that you've chosen this style versus this other style. The choice that was made causes us to not to be able to do X.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious decision, or would there be, if we wanted to put in the work to change it, would it make sense? I don't, because I don't know the answer, but it's always worth asking.
Absolutely. So that's an action item we'll take away. We'll go into it.
And then separately from that, so it sounds like, okay, so you've got a stack and you probably need some benchmarks to benchmark it. And similarly, I guess those benchmarks apply to whether you're using the accelerated stack or not.
What do you mean by that? As in our point was basically that, we saw the kinds of benchmarks that you guys have, and they're very representative of the kinds of things that we'd want to do. So we know from reading around that Node.js is used in different styles of operation.
Yep.
We just thought we'd help fill in some of those gaps in the types of benchmarks.
Right. Okay. So, right. And so I think the starting point for that is to look at the case coverage, which I think you already did. And let me share that. Is this the right one? I think so. Right. So basically start with this one and then figure out, which ones you think would be a good candidate to start with in terms of, writing a new benchmark, finding a benchmark, or, finding one, tweaking one, or just writing one, writing a new one from scratch.
Yeah. And that's where we could do with a little bit of help from you guys. So the ones that are interesting to us are the ones that are missing are obviously service-oriented architectures, the single web page, agency collectors.
Yep.
Do you have any feel on what the majority of, in terms of, if you were to say Node.js breakdown by percentage of use case, which one is the biggest here right now that is missing?
I don't have a percentage. So I think, Acme Air covers the generating dynamic serving web page contact. Now, I think from my perspective, the single page applications is another one that's quite high on that list.
Okay.
That would probably be the one that I would choose. The other one that's not on the list that we should probably be adding is stuff related to promises.
Okay.
But I don't know if promises really relate to sort of the use case that you're thinking of, right?
Well, certainly something we will take a look at because if there is something that we could do to accelerate that, and if that's a kind of common way of doing things, we would be happy to contribute to that. The other thing that maybe interests us, apart from the single page, so out of these 3 that are missing, I think or 4 that are missing, we'll probably be able to contribute 2 while Oliver's around.
Okay.
And I think maybe single page, What about microservice-based applications? Is Node.js very popular for microservices?
Oh yeah, that's another. Yeah, it's a very common use case is to have microservices, and there is a little bit of overlap, I think, because there's even like Acme Air. I think there's a new version which is microservice based.
Okay.
So that'd be one actually to look at and see if there's that newer version is something we want to get running, or if there's some other good benchmarks on the microservices front. But yeah, no, microservices and the single page, those are, yeah, one of the very common use cases is microservices in
All right.
Node.js.
So I think that gives us kind of a starting point. Now the question for us becomes, we need some guidance on, because we're not very familiar with we're now familiar with the benchmarks and the structure of Node.js as an application, but we're not very familiar with the ecosystem.
Yep.
Do you have any kinds of suggestions or people we could talk to about what we should be doing in terms of building representative?
I'm trying to think who would be some good people in the community who might step up to do that. Like, I think basically if you open, what I'd suggest is in the benchmarking repo, you open an issue that says, hey, we're add the background that you've talked about. We'd like to contribute both a service-oriented architecture and generating dynamics, the single page application use cases. We can do some research, but it would be good if we could talk to a few people. Okay. Having done that, I think there's a few people like from Nearform and NodeSource I can like at CC and say, hey, would you guys have any time to, give you guys a bit of a, sort of a brain dump.
Okay.
And at the same time, if you guys can do some, go out there and do some research, and hopefully we can connect you with a few people through that issue. Maybe that's enough to get started.
I think that would be great. Like I said, as long as you can guide us, I'm pretty sure we can get something up and going in short order.
Yeah, and I think like as you start to develop, like even if, we'll try and get as much feedback input as along the way. And so, if you do some research and say, hey, this looks like a good candidate, we should post that in and try and get people from the community to comment.
Okay.
And I can help facilitate trying to get people to come and say, oh yeah, that looks like something that resonates with us as a benchmark or not, and so forth.
That sounds great. Okay, great.
I mean, so for the single page one, the one that I think that one's a particular fit with what, the background you were giving in that there's usually a WebSocket connection behind the scenes there.
Yeah.
And, for that one, we want coverage to make sure that, we're not regressing, say, WebSocket or HTTP communication.
Okay.
Or HTTP communication with the changes that so it's kind of a good fit there. The other thing I will add is Udom, who's not here today, they did work on this framework which they call DCEIS.
Okay.
And the first thing that they built in that was kind of a web, it falls into the, and actually we should probably update that because we didn't in this table, but it still kind of fits into the serving dynamic web page content as far as I understand.
Got it.
But it's a framework in which they've always said would be a framework to add additional use cases.
All right.
So it might be a good starting point in terms of like, okay, start with the framework and then add in a new use case that covers one of these other things. So we should definitely get you hooked up with him as is that a starting point as opposed to starting from scratch?
Okay. That sounds useful. In terms of the agents and data collectors use case, do you have any examples of how people are using Node.js in this case?
I internally in IBM, I'm pretty sure one of our products uses that as, basically it's part of the agent because, Node is nice and small and starts up fast. It's part of the agent which runs on your machine itself.
Okay.
And then, sends data back to the sort of management interface.
All right.
I could probably ask for a bit more of a higher level explanation of, the general flow of how it's used, if that's useful.
Yeah, that would be really great for us.
Okay. So maybe just in the issue, mention that one as well, and that'll be a reminder to me to send off that to see if
Right.
I can get sort of like a high level picture of how it uses Node.
Okay, that sounds great. Great. I mean, I think that kind of covers the starting points we had. Like I said, we are mostly just looking for guidance and some interaction with the community that we're doing the right thing. We would
Yep.
like to be able to pass our code back to you guys and something you could integrate into this bench.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically on that front, what that ends up taking is, hopefully it results in a PR.
Okay.
We have this benchmarks directory, and let's see. Where to start? I think, unfortunately, it's still under experimental. It's not the best name, but never changed. But in here, if you can see the screen I'm sharing, there's like a directory.
Right.
And so, for example, Node.js, it has the pieces that you need to run that script. They may do things like, grab an npm or grab a binary from somewhere. Ideally, if we can check everything into the repo here,
Okay.
because on our benchmarking machine, when the nightly runs run, they basically clone this repo, and then the jobs will run a set of scripts one after another. So it basically just says, clone the repo. Then for the first benchmark, invoke this script, which should basically run the benchmark and return some numbers.
Okay.
And then there's a second step that follows each of those, which basically publishes those to a database. And so now you have the data for that particular benchmark in the database.
Okay.
So hopefully, what you can end up with is for each of the benchmarks you want to add, it would be a PR that adds one or more files in under this experimental benchmarks directory.
Yeah.
Then to go along with that, under the benchmarking directory, benchmarks, there's basically a file, this JSON file, which basically says, okay, I want to generate a chart. And this basically says, okay, for benchmark 8, and that's the key into the database, I want to, generate a chart. It uses, the template, which has some common stuff, but you can set the name, units, and then the streams. So again, each stream, like we run the benchmarks for like versions 6, 8, and 10 of Node right now.
Yeah.
And master and canary. So it basically says what streams you want to show up on the graph. So say you're only running it for the latest ones, it only shows up for that. And then that'll automatically generate a chart that we can show on benchmarking.nodejs.org.
Okay.
I don't know if you've looked at that before.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, okay. So basically it's, you come up with the PR that says, here are the scripts you need to run. You add it, you include this configuration that says, oh, and here's how I want the chart that's configured. Then we can update the main job that runs every night to include another step to run that benchmark. Generally we don't want them to be super long. So, 5, 10, 20 minutes at most.
Yeah.
And then, we update that, it'll start generating the data, and then and the charts will actually automatically be generated. And once we think they look good, we update it's again in here, one of these template files. I think, where is it? Oh, here. We basically update this index file to have another entry for that particular chart. Right. So we just add one into there. So the bulk of the work is actually getting the benchmark into a form where you can run it from those few scripts.
Yeah.
And then adding it in after that is, maybe an hour or so of work, but not a huge amount.
Okay, that sounds fine. I had some questions about, you've talked a little bit about the server side. What do you do on the client side in terms of generating load?
It's all in those same scripts. So for example, in Acme Air, it uses a load generator. And which one does it use? It uses one of the common ones, JUnit, I think, even possibly.
All right.
But it uses a load generator. There's actually, like, if you're looking for a new load generator for one of these, AutoCannon is a JavaScript-based one that's maybe a good candidate.
All right.
But we have a four-core dedicated machine that we run the benchmarks on. They're Linux.
Okay.
And what the scripts for Acme Air, for example, in DCAIS do is they actually pin the different pieces to different cores.
Okay.
By default, Node is single-threaded for the most part anyway, depending on what you're doing. So, we'll pin Node to a couple cores, for example, if you're using a backend database to one of the cores, and then the load generator to another one of the cores. But that's all part of the same. Like if I went back to here and looked at the benchmarks, and you can go and look at these and see, look at what the examples look like. The run Acme Air here should be, starting up. Like here, for example, is saying, here's the affinity we're going to use for each of those different components.
Okay. So
in terms of the CPUs and stuff.
So obviously, as a function of the company that we work for, we would be interested in taking this across machines and also, kind of doing experiments. I don't know if we'll get to it in the time that Oliver's around, but definitely want to get to points where, you're trying to saturate the link, or you're looking at things like tail end latencies across a network. Are those sorts of patches anything that you'd be interested in incorporating into this benchmark?
So in the larger scale, we're interested in all aspects. Realistically, in terms of our infrastructure, though, we just have the single dedicated machine.
Sure. No, I was thinking we would build it along the lines of we would stay within your framework and your kind of configuration, but just put in all the stuff so that if people want to take it across machines, that's okay.
Absolutely. Like, having more options in the files that are checked in, so somebody else could check it out and run it in a like multi-machine way and all that. Yeah, that I think is very interesting.
Okay. We'll try and incorporate some of that stuff in as well, because we'll probably do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes. So it's like to let other people do it, and who knows, if for some reason, we found that ended up being something we badly regressed sometime or something, we might even be motivated to set something up in our environment at some point. So
okay.
Having the extra flexibility is I think definitely a good thing. Okay,
super. So I think this kind of covers the questions I had. Oliver, do you have any questions?
Not in particular now. I've made some notes, got some stuff to go do tomorrow, but no particular questions, no.
So yeah, good. And like I said, open the issue, put in all the details, and really keep it updated. So because that's a good way to sort of remind people to comment in, and I'll do my best to jump in. And if you have specific questions and stuff that people aren't jumping in to answer, just ping me, and I'll try and think of people I can sort of reach out to and ask to take a look at that kind of stuff.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks. In terms of what we have already, so we have a set of very simple benchmarks. Oliver, do you want to talk a little bit more about them?
Very simple benchmarks was just running. So I've got a Node.js thing that just responds. It takes is it based on the 164 on the URL? It returns a thing that's either 64 bytes or 4 kilobytes in size, and then you run it with Apache Bench at different speeds. That's about it.
Yeah. So the point we were going to make was that I think is very similar in kind of spirit to almost, you could think like a microservices or a REST API endpoint. What we'll probably do is try and convert some of that over, integrate some of that, and then build on top of the bigger micro benchmark stuff that we've got. So we'll throw all that stuff into the issue as well, in case we can reuse some of that code.
Yeah, basically, the things that, if you can outline your ideas and what might be a good starting point, then we can try and get as broad as an input from people to say, hey, does this seem reasonable? And
all right.
The other thing that's interesting too is if you have any data that show, Node.js is sensitive in particular areas,
Yes.
and those show up in the benchmarks, that's interesting as well. Like, if you find that, I don't know, we tweak the HTTP implementation in this way and it now halves the speed or it increases the speed, and that's shown in the benchmark, that's a very good way to show that that's a decent benchmark for covering that particular case, right?
Yeah. All right. Okay, we'll definitely try and incorporate some of that stuff into what we're doing as we move forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So I think, yeah, unless you have any other questions, we may call that for the meeting this week, and look forward to interacting through GitHub. And, of course, hopefully we'll see you again. I think it's 3 weeks from now, the next one that's scheduled on the calendar.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Did I point you at the calendar?
Yes, you did in the email you
Okay,
sent.
so okay, great. So you can find when the next one is. And
yeah. So thank you again for your time. We very much appreciate it, and we hope to start interacting with you guys soon.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. And hopefully in September, we'll have a few more of the team members here and can have a bigger conversation. But it sounds like you got everything you need to get a good start, which is great.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
And thanks a lot for coming and volunteering to do some of this work. It's definitely something we need help with, and it'll be really good to have your help here.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Talk to you next time. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.